Alright guys, so I'm going to do a short video here on the equalizer plugin here in Waves. This is called the Q6 equalizer. It gives you 6 bands, high pass and low pass if you need it. High shelf, low shelf, etc. are part of those bands. So some consoles you may have used have those as separate. In this case, they are part of this. So we'll reserve the first band here for the high pass for that. So an important thing to look at here is I've turned off all of the other plugins on this channel strip just so we can get a good view of this today. I would recommend, if you're doing any significant EQ changes, to just bypass these so you can hear what's actually happening in the EQ before it hits the other plugins. You may have to tweak other plugins as a result. I would also suggest doing your EQ first thing just to make sure you're getting a good representation coming into these other plugins as you go through the chain. Starts at the top, goes through this. The other thing to look for is here's your input level into this whole chain. Should be at peaks between -20 and -15. And here's your output over here. Again, you should keep that in general between -20 and -15. There's exceptions to that on percussive instruments such as drums and some other things, but in general it's a good rule of thumb to keep your output level around -15 to -20, and same for your input. And I will talk about those exceptions in some other videos. It's also important to keep your gain structure, so the amount of gain you have coming through your plugins, consistent through your entire plugin chain, unless you have a very specific reason for changing it. And I'll talk about that a little bit in this video, but also in other videos. If your gain is too low coming into the entire signal chain, you probably need to talk to whoever is controlling the gain at the, in this case, front of house board during the very initial part of rehearsal, so that they can adjust it. If they change it after rehearsal is already going, it'll also affect the bands in-ear monitors. So it's very important to get the gain structure right first. If you have to, you can use trim or some of these controls to change your gain to make up for certain things, but it's always best to do it at the source, which is, in this case, the front of house console, before it comes into the live stream console. So this Q6, like I said, has 6 bands. We're going to play a looping track here. This is Jelani. We're going to feature Jelani here from the Christmas 9 a.m. service, and it'll be a Christmas song here. You'll get to hear a nice loop of this one section of it. What child is this who lays so this is completely flat, no compression, no EQ yet. It is in, but it's flat. First thing we're going to do here is we're going to set the high pass. So I'm going to turn this on. You can also turn it on by clicking it and dragging it. If you make a change, it will turn it on. So I'm gonna bring it up to the point where I begin to hear his voice character starting to change, and then I'm going to back it off slightly so that his voice character doesn't change, but it gets rid of some of the mud. Here we go. What child is this who lay to rest? So this is when it starts to change his voice right here. It's cutting out some of the richness and warmth. I want to keep that in from a high pass perspective, but I might tweak it with this EQ band later. So I'm going to bring my high pass down a little bit below that, just to leave some of that warmth in. This is Christ the King. So that's a good start for high pass. Then I'm going to do some of the peak or harsh frequencies. I'm going to sweep these bands around so you can hear what I'm doing. So I'm going to start with low. What happens is, if you have a fundamental harmonic, the harmonic series is something this mathematical, but if you have a lower harmonic, it actually can create higher harmonics as a result of it. So you always want to start with any low problems, and then move your way up. So I'm going to just sweep this around. So there's nothing crazy. There is one right here. There's some mud right here. Right here. So I'm going to take this. I'm not going to move it anywhere, but I'm going to bring the gain down to start cutting things here. I'm going to tighten that Q so it's only getting rid of that mud. So without this band, here we go. It's not doing much in context, it's just taking a little bit of this mud out. Then I'm going to move up to the next band here and see what the next frequency is. One thing I would recommend is not to cross any of your bands, so you wouldn't want your second frequency in the list to be up here. So you want to keep them in order. That's why I'm recommending that you start from low to high. And if you find one lower than this is a problem, I would rearrange your frequencies to move this one down, etc. The person following behind you will thank you if you do that. So next band here. This is Christ the King, whom shepherds guard and angels sing. So this is probably the next one I'm just going to cut very slightly. There's just a little bit of tonal resonance in there. And I'm going to do a pretty tight Q with that. So without EQ, with EQ, very subtle. We're just gently changing the dynamic or the overall tonality of a few spots. We'll do a little bit more up here. Here's one right there. It's around 700 hertz. Again, just a small cut. Notice I'm only doing a few decibels. Unless it really needs it, then I would do more. But the smaller cuts you have, not necessarily narrowness, but the smaller gain cuts you have, the less you're actually cutting the level going down through this chain. As you have bigger cuts, you'll actually start cutting the level coming down through here. So we'll go to the next one. So his voice is pretty smooth today. What child is this who lay to rest on me? I honestly probably wouldn't make a cut there. If anything, where I landed right here, there may need to be a small cut, but we're going to leave it at 0 for now. I think it's okay. If he is leading a song, the other thing you can do is you can give a slight presence boost, either via parametric EQ, which is this button, or this button is a high shelf. I would personally do a gentle high shelf, so I'm going to start it around 3 or 4K, and I'm going to bring it up a little bit, so just a little bit of a high boost there. And then I usually make it a very gradual, so if you bring the Q up, usually it makes it a steeper curve. I guess it doesn't with this EQ. It does with a lot of them, but not with this EQ. It does with the F6, which we'll go to in another video. But so probably just a few dB there. And then I'll turn it off so you can hear a comparison. Here's it off. So it's just a little bit muddier. Then EQN. Small cuts, but it helps clean up the vocal range so it sounds more like him. That's really the point of EQ. You're trying to make the instrument or vocal sound more like it should, both in the mix and how it should in person, if you were listening to him sing in person. So I hope that helps. That can be used really across the board, some of those principles for finding frequencies. The narrow small cuts, things like that are all very helpful.
On Mary's lap.